My buddy, a new season of Baki, the champion just dropped. The anime, that's 1% story and 99% fighting, and now they've gone and unfrozen a caveman. Things are really wild here. No joke. Not to mention, I'm sure this anime's getting cancelled. So much weird stuff happened in this anime, you have no idea. Stick with me on this adventure, and let's watch a bunch of muscle-bound guys duking it out. The episode kicks off with an epic opening, a meteor crashing into Earth and wiping out all the dinosaurs. There was this guy fighting a Tyrannosaurus Rex. This one here is Piccolo, the prehistoric man who was thought out to fight against the most powerful ones of today. And no kidding, this opening is amazing, buddy. Baki starts off with a split, stretch and legs up. He was training peacefully until the captain came to talk to him, because he wants Baki to meet someone who's quite special. What's the strongest animal in history? The strongest on the planet is ... Dinosaur, right. Then the guy asks which dinosaur was the strongest, and Baki says it's the T-Rex. The old man tosses something into Baki's hand, and he's shocked to find someone stronger than the dinosaur. Aside from fighting, we're learning a lot of history here too. This fighter was frozen inside a block of salt, and he was attacking a dinosaur. The two were frozen, but everyone thinks it's impossible for a man to attack a dinosaur, so Piccolo was taken to none other than Albert Einstein. Man, he's the one taking care of the body of this Neanderthal, this prehistoric caveman. Their goal is to revive him, and they've already managed to do that with some bacteria, so reviving a person shouldn't be too hard, but I have a feeling this story is gonna end badly. Buddy, listen to me. Look at this guy's hand. Look at his claws. They named this caveman Piccolo, and Pyoko means pickle ... Are you out of your mind, man? Piccolo was put inside ... They put Piccolo in an incubator bath, like the one Wolverine used when he had surgery to get adamantium. This shows the experiment is totally crazy, and the scientist even flicked a cigarette in Piccolo's face. At that moment, he had a brilliant idea. He would be the first living being to eat a Tyrannosaurus. Meanwhile, Albert Einstein noticed there was dinosaur meat in Piccolo's stomach, meaning he was the one who attacked the dinosaur. The scientist then prepared a T-Rex steak, and the smell of the food ... It wasn't enough to wake Piccolo up from his sleep. He woke up all muscular, all ripped. For him, everything there was new. It was the first time he'd seen real technology in front of him. He was a bit confused, but recognized the smell of that juicy dinosaur steak. While the scientist was distracted, Piccolo snuck up behind him, and look at the size of the guy. That's when the scientist started to freak out. The guy's mind was completely blown. He froze, but then he realized this scientist was too weak and decided to run away from there. However, the scientist had already grabbed the revolver. Without a doubt, this was the worst decision he could have made. The scientist started shooting at him, but obviously those bullets wouldn't have much effect. In fact, they only caused a few scratches and nothing more. With a swift move, the primate creature hurled the bullets back with incredible force. The scientist, completely stunned, froze in fear. Then the creature grabbed him, shook him violently in the air, and dropped him to the ground. It seemed like the creature was trying to communicate, but since the scientist didn't understand the language of primates, all he got was a strong slap that left him dazed. He ran far away, but it was already too late for him. He tried to hide where the T-Rex was, thinking that would be enough to fool Piccolo. For a moment, it even seemed to work. The scientist managed to trap him inside. After that, the situation only escalated, and even the police were called. Needless to say, the scientist came up with a completely ridiculous story, right? He claimed he had defeated Piccolo with his bare hands. According to him, he even captured Piccolo all by himself. Oh, come on, even parrots can talk, right? But I'd like to see him muster up the courage to actually face that muscular giant for real. Anyway, don't worry, that's when the police arrived to arrest Piccolo, who finally woke up from his Cinderella sleep. Then things got even crazier, as all the bar's characters somehow got involved in the chaos. With his jaw completely clenched, everyone around was in shock. Almost like tourists watching an absurd spectacle, it was pure chaos. Suddenly, without warning, Piccolo smashed through the wall and stepped outside, utterly out of control. The situation escalated quickly, and they called for 30 men to try and contain him. However, Piccolo, with his incredible strength, simply grabbed a patrol car with his bare hands as if it were a toy. That's when they called in the army. After all, this was the perfect opportunity to test a new weapon, an experimental robotic suit. While all of this was unfolding, Piccolo remained seated, completely calm, as if nothing was happening, utterly unbothered. Then a soldier arrived, equipped with the robotic suit, ready to face Piccolo one-on-one. What happened next was jaw-dropping. Piccolo slowly stood up, glaring at the soldier with an intimidating stare, ready for the fight. Piccolo went straight for the massive robot as if it were nothing. With a single punch, he completely destroyed the entire suit, reducing it to scraps. Even the drill they tried to use against him was utterly useless. It didn't stand a chance. It was clear reinforcements were needed because that squad wasn't going to cut it. The soldiers, all with chiseled jaws and bodybuilder physiques, looked more like they were ready for a bodybuilding competition than a fight with Piccolo. That's when the captain stepped out of the jeep with confidence, determined to take on the giant alone. Without hesitation, he started removing his clothes as he walked, piece by piece, as if preparing for the battle of his life. What happened next was almost surreal. To men, with nothing on, face to face, it was as if they were ready for an epic showdown, but unfortunately, I won't describe this part here. After all, it might be a little too much for this context. Piccolo went straight for the massive robot as if it were nothing. With a single punch, he completely destroyed the entire suit, reducing it to scraps. Even the drill they tried to use against him was utterly useless. It didn't stand a chance. It was clear reinforcements were needed because that squad wasn't going to cut it. The soldiers, all with chiseled jaws and bodybuilder physiques, looked more like they were ready for a bodybuilding competition than a fight with Piccolo. That's when the captain stepped out of the jeep with confidence, determined to take on the giant alone. Without hesitation, he started removing his clothes as he walked, piece by piece, as if preparing for the battle of his life. What happened next was almost surreal. To men, with nothing on, face to face, it was as if they were ready for an epic showdown, but unfortunately, I won't describe this part here. After all, it might be a little too much for this context. It was a somewhat bizarre situation, but everything was relatively calm. Piccolo was taken to Japan in episode 2. His arrival was highly anticipated. He was transported by a military aircraft, and by the time he landed, he had already become a true celebrity. Everyone seemed to know the giant. Surrounded by a group of soldiers, Piccolo caught everyone's attention wherever he went. And there was no denying it. He was both imposing and awe-inspiring. His gaze was intense, almost hypnotic. Just seeing him on TV was enough to leave people in shock, like one customer at the bar who panicked and began sweating if he were face to face with Piccolo himself. But hold on, things were just getting started. This was the setup for one of the most impactful scenes in the anime. A reporter approached to interview Piccolo. The moment he heard her voice, something unexpected happened. When Piccolo looked at the reporter, it was as if he instinctively recognized a feminine presence in her. And yes, exactly what you're imagining happens. That scene was, to say the least, controversial, and you have to admit the anime's creators were quite bold to include something like that in the storyline. After the incident, Piccolo simply lay down on the ground and fell asleep as if nothing had happened. It was the classic case of eat and sleep, if you catch my drift. Meanwhile, the narrative takes a curious turn, introducing none other than Robert Einstein. He appears explaining in a didactic way about the extinction of the dinosaurs, and, believe it or not, everything he says is true. I was there to see it all. Einstein elaborates on how the freezing conditions during the extinction of the dinosaurs were what allowed Piccolo to remain so well preserved. However, after the incident with the reporter, public opinion began to shift. The population was in an uproar, debating whether Piccolo was a threat or simply a misunderstood being. The chaos and discussions only grew, and his presence in Japan quickly became a global topic of debate. The situation spiraled into complete chaos. Protests broke out in the streets, and amidst all the uproar, the mysterious Yujiroma appeared right at the Army HQ gates to see Piccolo. Meanwhile, more people began infiltrating the base. Piccolo was in a peculiar area inside, which looked more like a children's playground, but he remained calm and unbothered by everything happening around him. That's when Hitsukai snuck into the place, determined to see Piccolo in person. Using a disguise, he tricked one of the guards and, in a bizarre twist, started following him so closely it was as if he were glued to him. The situation got so strange that at one point, the guards started fighting among themselves, and one of them, shockingly, began hitting himself. Meanwhile, Yujiroma, with incredible strength, struck the base's gate and broke the lock with his bare hands, walking in as if it were his living room. Inside the base, Piccolo was still sleeping, completely unaware of the commotion. But the chaos wasn't over yet. Another intruder, Kyo Shinobi, one of the world's greatest fighters, had also entered. He, along with several others, was obsessed with facing Piccolo. But things took an even stranger turn. A toy dinosaur started moving. Orochi had been hiding inside the toy as a disguise, and he wasn't alone. Jack, Rama, Goku, and Katsumi were also there. Practically a crowd of fighters had invaded the base, all to see Piccolo, and yes, he was still naked. When they finally reached Piccolo, he was still sleeping, completely unbothered. But Jack decided to wake him up the hard way, delivering a powerful kick to a nearby tree. This jolted Piccolo awake, and he immediately began staring down the intruders. It was at this moment that Yujiroma, the strongest creature in the world, stepped forward, intimidating Katsumi and exposing his weakness. Katsumi tried to fight back, but Yujiroma, with incredibly quick reflexes, simply took Katsumi's shoelace and threw it in his face as if mocking him. After that, Yujiroma displayed even more of his strength, shattering a bulletproof glass pane with nothing but his muscles. His clothes were torn, revealing his impressive physique. He stepped into Piccolo's area, ready to face him in a one-on-one fight. And then an epic battle began, Piccolo and Yujiroma measuring their strength, trading blows so intense the ground around them seemed to quake. The intensity of the fight was surreal, hinting that this would be the greatest showdown in history. After Piccolo devoured the Siberian tiger, the broadcast of the event caused worldwide uproar. While millions watched in horror, Albert Einstein seemed indifferent. He continued justifying his actions with scientific speeches, claiming it was all part of a historical, unprecedented experiment. However, the protests only grew louder, with activists and environmentalists condemning the use of endangered species to feed a monster. Even so, Einstein didn't seem willing to stop. He was obsessed with proving that Piccolo was more than a caveman. He was a superior being, a true apex predator. Meanwhile, Baki, watching from home, felt increasingly uneasy. Piccolo's strength was unlike anything he had ever seen. He knew that if he ever wanted to surpass his father, he would have to face Piccolo. However, the idea of fighting such a brutal being left Baki torn between fear and excitement. In his mind, that fight was inevitable, but he needed to prepare. At the same time, Hitsukayo, the martial arts master, was developing his own plan. He believed that defeating Piccolo required more than brute strength. It required strategy and discipline. He began training in secret, studying Piccolo's movements through footage captured by military drones. Every punch, every step, every reaction from Piccolo was analyzed with precision. Hitsu was determined to become the only one capable of defeating the caveman. Meanwhile, Piccolo was in his new habitat, a space surrounded by cameras, soldiers, and scientists. But unlike what many expected, he showed no aggression. He seemed bored, as if nothing around him was worth his attention. Even the animals sent to fight him no longer interested him. Piccolo wanted something bigger, something that would truly test his strength. He wanted a real challenge. It was in this context that Yujiroma reappeared after leaving the military base. In the previous episode, he began observing Piccolo from a distance, waiting for the right moment to act. Yujiroma knew Piccolo was powerful, but he believed his strength had limits. He wanted to prove that, despite everything, humans were superior. Thus, he began planning a grand entrance, a confrontation that would show the world who the true ultimate warrior was. However, before Yujiroma could put his plan into action, something unexpected happened. A group of mercenaries, led by a mysterious man known only as the Black Tiger, invaded the complex where Piccolo was being held. This group had a single goal: to capture Piccolo and use him as a weapon in international conflicts. They believed that with Piccolo on their side, they could dominate the world. The mercenaries entered the complex using a combination of advanced technology and guerrilla tactics. They managed to neutralize the soldiers and breach the chamber where Piccolo was being held. However, upon facing the caveman, they realized they had made a grave mistake. Piccolo, seeing the armed mercenaries, finally found the challenge he had been waiting for. He rose slowly, his eyes glowing with a mix of rage and excitement. The confrontation was brutal. Piccolo destroyed the mercenaries one by one, using only his hands. The advanced weapons were no match for his overwhelming strength. Every move he made was fast and precise, as if he anticipated the attacks before they even happened. Within minutes, the entire group was annihilated. The leader, the Black Tiger, tried to escape, but Piccolo easily caught him. He grabbed the man by the neck and, with a single motion, ended the fight. Meanwhile, Hitsu and Baki, who were following everything through the live broadcast, knew the time to act was near. Both were determined to face Piccolo, but for entirely different reasons. For Hitsu, it was a matter of honor and discipline. For Baki, it was an opportunity to prove he was worthy of surpassing his father. The episode ended with Piccolo sitting on his makeshift throne, surrounded by the wreckage of the mercenaries. He seemed invincible, yet there was something in his eyes that hinted at a deep longing for an even greater challenge. The world was about to witness an epic showdown, and all paths led to one inevitable destination: the final clash between Piccolo, Baki, and Hitsu. It was at that moment that Retiro decided to volunteer as prey for Pico. He wanted to fight the beast. Meanwhile, Albert Einstein was being interviewed but chose not to comment to avoid controversy, and the king seemed indifferent. He was ready to become Pico's meal, clearly determined. The fight began. Pico versus Hitsukayu. The king was already shirtless, ready for combat, while Pico was relaxed, lying on his back, as if he had no concerns. For him, there was no threat. Accustomed to fighting dinosaurs, Pico saw no reason to worrying about ordinary opponents. When Hitsukayu approached, Pico woke up, sensing the imminent threat. He immediately went into attack mode. Hitsukayu tried to strike, but with a single move, Pico sent him flying like a light object. The battle grew intense, kicks, sweeps, and relentless attacks from Hitsukayu, but nothing seemed to affect Pico. He began to cry, something he only did before eliminating his prey. Despite Hitsukayu's efforts, his strikes were insignificant against Pico's resilience. Hitsukayu attempted brute force, but it was like a child fighting an adult. Desperate, he decided to fully commit to martial arts. He began to react, delivering an impressive sequence of strikes, including some low moves, but Pico resisted. Hitsukayu finally managed to bring Pico down, but the victory was an illusion. Albert Einstein explained that Pico's anatomy was entirely different, denser bones, and a structure that made it nearly impossible to cause a knockout. The fight was practically futile. Pico, in his attack stance, advanced with crushing force. Hitsukayu tried to resist, but was thrown far away. The attack was so powerful that it was only used against monstrous creatures. Pico started crying again, his preparation before devouring his prey. The fight ended humiliatingly for Hitsukayu, who was seriously injured. Despite everything, he survived but carried the weight of defeat. Now, the next challenge would be for Baki to face Pico, but that would take some time. It was then that Retiro decided to volunteer to be his prey. He wanted to fight Pico, who was being interviewed to the limit, but didn't want to say anything to avoid being cancelled, of course. The king didn't care, he wanted to face Pico. I think he's in love, maybe a rivalry growing between two sweaty men without shirts. Trust me, you'll see what's going to happen. The battle is about to start, Pico versus Hitsukayu. At that moment, the king was already shirtless, moving towards Pico, while Pico was relaxed, lying on his back with his belly up. Like any relaxed animal, for Pico, no threat is big enough. The guy is used to fighting dinosaurs. Do you really think weak opponents are going to do anything to him? At that very moment, Pico woke up, sensing an imminent threat. Yes, Hitsukayu was approaching. Finally, a worthy opponent. Pico went into attack mode, and he was furious. The king charged at him, but Pico knocked him away with a slap, sending him flying like he was nothing. But hold on, the fight was just starting. The king kicked Pico in the face, then tripped him and kicked him again. But it was no use. Pico then started crying, something he only does when he's about to devour his prey. The king kept hitting him, but it felt like his punches were just a massage. No matter how much he hit, Pico was immune. The king tried again, but Pico grabbed him by the head and, with a decisive move, knocked him out. Then it was only about devouring. Yes, as expected, Pico did what we all anticipated. The king tried to take off his sandal, and when he does that, it means he's going to fight seriously, but without the sandal, he was being defeated. He gave up on martial arts and decided to use brute force, but again, that didn't work. The king seemed like a child trying to hit an adult, a completely unbalanced fight. Pico treated him like a female, but Hitsukayu started using his techniques again, reacting automatically, and even began talking to himself, like talking to a genie. That scene was strange, but he completely gave himself over to martial arts. Now, he started countering with everything, even landing a low blow on Pico, if you know what I mean. His sequence of strikes was impressive, and he really knocked Pico to the ground. The question remains, did he win? Episode 4 starts with Hitsukayu lying on the ground, finally managing to use his techniques to defeat the caveman, the strongest being in the world, but in fact, he didn't win. Pico, with his thick bones and impressive cervical spine, simply doesn't feel the king's blows. Hitsukayu's attacks had no effect. Albert Einstein then explained Pico's anatomy. How? His bones are so thick that it's practically impossible to knock him out. So the whole fight was in vain. Martial arts only work against ordinary humans, but Pico is far from ordinary. Pico, now in an attack stance, prepared to deliver a devastating blow, the crushing fist, but Pico was even faster, and his charge was so powerful that it could crush 3 ceratops. The attack was massive, but the king also managed to land a punch to Pico's eye, and that didn't go unpunished. As always, Pico started crying, which means he was about to devour his prey. The king tried to recover, but it was too late. Pico only devours those who attack or threaten him, and the king knew this from the start. He was defeated in the end. Albert Einstein put him to sleep with a Cinderella good night. The king was alive but badly injured. In the end, he regretted it. He thought he was strong, but realized he was just a background character. And, incredibly, the king was treated like a student who took a lot of hits. Pico, with his absolute power, had no problem defeating him. The king will try to get revenge, but that will take time. He took a beating and the shock was great. Bro, that's when Retiro decided to volunteer as the prey. He wants to fight Pico. Meanwhile, Albert Einstein was being interviewed but wisely avoided making comments to avoid cancellation. As for the king, he didn't care. He seemed ready to become Pico's meal. Could it be love at this rate? It seems like a sweaty showdown between shirtless men is about to go down. Trust me, the fight is starting now. Pico versus Hitsukayu. At that moment, the king was already shirtless, heading toward Pico, who was resting on his back. Animals that sleep like this are completely relaxed. For Pico, there are no threats. He's used to fighting dinosaurs. Do you think average opponents make a difference? That's when he woke up, sensing an imminent threat. Hitsukayu was approaching. Pico, already in attack mode, was furious. When Hitsu tried to strike, he got smacked so hard he was thrown far away. This was just the beginning. Hitsu responded with kicks and sweeps, but nothing seemed to affect Pico, while Hitsu kept attacking. Pico started crying, something he only does before devouring his prey. Despite countless strikes, it felt like Hitsu was merely massaging Pico. In one swift move, Pico grabbed Hitsu by the head, struck him, and knocked him out cold. After that, he devoured the king. It was a brutal spectacle. Hitsu then removed his sandals, showing he was ready to fight seriously, but brute force wasn't enough either. He tried martial arts, but it was like a child trying to hit an adult. Only when his future self advised him did he return with refined strategies. Still, Pico resisted. Albert Einstein explained that Pico's anatomy was unique, with bones and a cervical spine so thick that it was impossible to knock him out. The fight seemed futile. When Pico assumed a ferocious attack posture, Hitsu decided not to back down. He used a direct strike, but Pico countered with a devastating charge, capable of taking down dinosaurs. The fight was brutal but predictable. Pico triumphed again. Meanwhile, at the dojo, another fighter was training to face Pico. He knew he needed to combine 4,000 years of kung fu history with 500 years of karate to create a unique style capable of standing up to this primal force. Meanwhile, Bak also trained, determined to surpass Pico so he could one day challenge his own father. In the end, Pico remained untouchable, resting on hard surfaces like concrete, while the humans around him desperately devised new strategies. The battle for survival against this brute force was far from over. In Episode 7, things heat up for real. The tension is palpable as the characters prepare for an epic showdown. After days of intense training, Katsumi has finally reached an unreal skill level. He has mastered the whip punch technique of force, so powerful it surpasses the speed of sound more than 20 times. With nearly imaginary joints, he has turned his arm into a lethal weapon. During a test, the impact of his punch was so strong it shattered all the nearby windows, proving he is now ready to face the caveman, Pico. While Katsumi honed his skills, Baki wasn't idle. He trained relentlessly, leaping, shadowboxing, and envisioning opponents as colossal as a Tyrannosaurus Rex. His determination was clear. He knew the fight against Pico was inevitable and that he needed to push beyond his limits to survive. Meanwhile, a dense energy hung in the air. The sound of Katsumi's punch echoed for miles, leaving no doubt that something monumental was about to unfold. The scene shifts to Katsumi running, backpack on his shoulders, heading toward the baseball stadium where the duel would take place. He wasn't just a fighter. He carried the weight of everyone's expectations, including his family's. Before leaving, he shared an emotional moment with his adoptive mother, who hugged him if it were a final goodbye. It was a hug filled with conflicting emotions, love, pride, and the anguish of perhaps never seeing him again. But that wasn't all. Another maternal figure appeared, his biological mother. She had the same determined gaze but carried the burden of a different story. With two mothers, two pasts, and a life full of sacrifices, Katsumi seemed to bear the weight of the world on his shoulders. His adoptive father, Orochi, had bet everything on him. Orochi had adopted Katsumi, believing in his acrobatic potential, which set him apart as a fighter. Now, Katsumi had to prove he could not only fight but win. After all, taking on a caveman who had backed the legendary Yujiro into a corner was no small feat. At the stadium, spectators waited anxiously. Pico, the primal man from the Cretaceous period, was ready with his robust body and animalistic movements. He wasn't just a fighter but a force of nature. The fight promised to be more than a display of brute strength. It would be a battle of eras, fighting styles, and above all, sheer determination. Katsumi knew the challenge ahead was more than physical. It was proof that evolution and technique could triumph over raw, instinctive power. In the final moments of preparation, Katsumi's story took a deep emotional turn. After meeting his biological mother, who still works tirelessly in a traveling circus, he shared an emotional embrace with her. For many, this seemed like a farewell. Katsumi donned his karate gi, ready for the battle of his life. Meanwhile, Baki was bruised and battered, still recovering from his intense shadowboxing session where he visualized fighting a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Even in pain, he met with his father, and both acknowledged the monumental fight ahead. As the fight began, Katsumi entered the arena, the crowd roaring in anticipation. The tension was palpable, and every eye was on him. When Pico arrived, his sheer presence was overwhelming. Katsumi wasted no time, unleashing a barrage of attacks. In a fraction of a second, he struck 5 vital points, delivered a kick to Pico's groin, and a devastating knee to his jaw. Yet, despite the precision and speed of these attacks, Pico barely flinched, laughing mockingly. His defense was impenetrable. With a single kick, Pico sent Katsumi flying across the arena, showcasing his terrifying power. Katsumi rose, refusing to give up, and began visualizing his skeleton, imagining it filled with countless joint divisions to enhance his strength. On the other side of the arena, Pico, seemingly unfazed, prepared for dinner, his usual feast of powerful adversaries. A flashback revealed his monstrous past, taking down and devouring enemies, even a T-Rex, cementing his dominance as a primal force. As the crowd watched in awe, Pico assumed a stance reminiscent of Yujiro Hama, signaling the start of something monumental. Katsumi summoned all his strength, delivering a whip punch at unimaginable speed, mimicking the tail strike of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. The punch shattered the sound barrier and sent shockwaves through the stadium. For the first time, Pico fell too, his knees visibly shaken by the power behind the blow. However, the cost of the attack was catastrophic for Katsumi. The sheer force of his punch caused severe damage to his own body, breaking his hands and feet. Despite the pain, he managed to strike Pico again with a brutal kick. Yet, even after these devastating attacks, Pico began to recover. With his signature sinister grin, he stood up effortlessly, towering over Katsumi, who was now on his knees, utterly spent. Albert Einstein's narration explained the anatomy behind Pico's resilience. Katsumi's punches had surpassed the speed of sound but caused more damage to himself than his opponent. Pico's body was built for battles of this magnitude, rendering him nearly indestructible. As Katsumi lay broken, it became clear that even the strongest martial artists struggled to compete with a being accustomed to battling dinosaurs. When Pico launched his supreme attack, Katsumi, despite his injuries, prepared a counterstrike. In a moment of raw desperation, Katsumi delivered another whip-like blow, this time so powerful that it sent Pico flying. The force was staggering, but it came at a cost. Katsumi's arm, pushed beyond its limits, suffered catastrophic damage. With bones protruding grotesquely, this battle showcased the stark contrast between primal strength and human evolution, leaving the audience in awe of both fighters' capabilities. Yet, the fight was far from over, and the next move would determine the victor in this clash of titans. Thanks to that strike, Katsumi managed to claim victory, raising his triumphant arm. But did he really win? Did he really? It seems not, as the entire audience was in a frenzy, believing in his victory. The truth, however, was that Pico had simply fallen asleep and hadn't actually lost the fight. He had just dozed off because he deemed his opponent too weak. Katsumi's and the crowd's joy was, in reality, a huge misunderstanding. When Pico woke up, he stood as if nothing had happened, while Katsumi, confused, began to realize the situation. With sadness in his eyes, Pico began to cry, something he always did before finishing off an opponent, as he saw it as a farewell. This time, he wasn't just fighting, he was reflecting. When fully awake, he went straight to the point. He tore off Katsumi's arm with his teeth, in a shocking and unforgettable moment. The fight, which already seemed brutal, reached a new level of intensity, revealing just how terrifying Pico could be. Katsumi collapsed to the ground, utterly defeated. Meanwhile, Katsumi's father, upon seeing what had happened, was furious. He saw it as a humiliation to his son's honor, but couldn't do much to change the outcome of the battle. Amid all the commotion, Pico did something unexpected. He knelt and began to pray. The narrator explained that this gesture was a demonstration of humanity and respect. Despite being a ruthless adversary, Pico acknowledged Katsumi's bravery and effort. This scene revealed a more complex side of the character, one that carried both ferocity and compassion. After this battle, it became clear that even when facing small and seemingly weak opponents, Pico could find something admirable in them. Katsumi, though injured and missing an arm, was carried out of the arena as the audience, filled with respect, knelt in honor. This fight marked a milestone for both characters, showcasing not just physical strength, but also mental resilience and the ability to learn. As Katsumi recovered in the hospital, he received support from friends and allies, like Baki, who brought flowers to show solidarity. Despite his physical loss, Katsumi was happy. He knew he had faced one of the greatest challenges of his life and emerged mentally stronger. At the same time, Pico, reflecting on the battle, displayed an unexpected posture of respect, a rare decision in his journey. This fight wasn't just physical. It was a clash of philosophies and personalities. If you need further adjustments or want to expand on any part, let me know. It seems like God has given them the chance to decide who is truly the strongest man in history once and for all. Meanwhile, Baki was training hard, sweating it out and struggling. He couldn't even form an image of Pico in front of him. Pico is an insanely skilled fighter, and even knowing all the weapons Pico has in his arsenal, Baki couldn't envision any way to mount an effective attack. That's when Ressus showed up, where Baki was training, a brutal training ground he called his monster factory, nothing more than a pit in the middle of the ground. The next opponent for Pico will be Baki, but Baki started to lose it. He began laughing maniacally, overwhelmed by the thrill of the battle. Finally, he was going to clash fists with someone absurdly powerful. He was fired up, ready to roll on the ground with that maniac. Early the next morning, the showdown would begin. Even the king looked at Baki and saw the essence of Durhama in him, as if he were speaking to the ogre himself. But while they were talking, Jack had already gone off to face Pico. Without hesitation, Jack stripped his shirt off for the fight, but strangely, the anime showed him taking off a shirt he wasn't even wearing. A weird animation error, but let's move on. Get ready, because this is about to be the most bizarre fight of all time. You've never seen anything quite like this. Pico versus Jack Rama. Jack Rama was the newest toy, and the day had come for him to test his mettle. Jack launched a powerful punch straight at Pico. For Pico, this was something new. Nobody had ever charged at him so fiercely before. It reminded him of the monsters from his past. Everyone, it seems, makes Pico think about dinosaurs. His unique skeletal structure means he's never been knocked out, but Jack wasn't interested in that. He was focused on Pico's teeth. Jack was ready to see who had the most powerful bite. The fight turned into a battle of bites. Who has the stronger jaws? If I had to bet, I'd put $50 on Pico. Jack lunged at Pico, and Pico lunged at Jack. What happened next was bizarre. They ended up locking lips. Yes, they shared a big, dramatic kiss. Imagine that. It was a surreal moment, one for the books. The fight had taken a strange turn, leaving everyone in disbelief. Of course, The gossiping old man couldn't hold back and spilled the details to Baki, revealing what Jack was up to. Furious, Baki was ready to intervene. Meanwhile, Pico, in a display of raw power, lifted Jack into the air, spun him around, and tore off his jaw completely. Jack's face was now just exposed bone, a truly unsettling sight. But if you thought the fight was over, think again, it was only beginning. Jack, even with his jaw gone, let out a chilling laugh as if he'd just experienced the thrill of his life. He then delivered an uppercut to Pico's jaw, launching him into the air like a ragdoll. However, Pico's physique is something else. Even after a strike like that, his brain didn't even flinch. Pico got back into his most dangerous fighting stance, the same one he used to take down 3 Ceratops with his single HEADBUTT. As the veins in Jack's head bulged, Baki finally arrived to witness the chaos, but by then, Pico had already attacked. Jack, using all his strength, threw Pico straight into the stands, launching him nearly 20 meters away. Even so, Pico was already getting up, ready to continue. It was clear this fight was far from over. Jack grabbed Pico by the head, smashed him into nearby objects, and hurled him back into the arena. The fight continued, and Jack unleashed a brutal kick to Pico's ear. The kind of kick that would make any mosquito buzz all night. He didn't stop there. Jack started stomping on Pico's throat. Jack's goal, to become the strongest man in the world, and what he did next was surreal, so wild I can't even describe it here. Jack went to extreme lengths to gain power. At one point, he bit Pico's ear clean off. Yes, you read that right, he tore it off completely. Jack's bite is no joke. For the first time, he held a piece of someone else's body in his hand, and now things were really heating up. Pico entered a rage-fueled Super Saiyan mode. Jack attacked, but his strike missed, leaving a cloud of dust behind. He tried again and missed again. Now Jack was starting to get scared. Pico was using an ancient technique dating back to the Cretaceous period, specifically designed for battling Tyrannosaurus Rex. The technique involved evading punches, gaining momentum from walls, and launching counterattacks at speeds too fast for Jack to follow. Jack was in serious trouble. If he survived, it would only be by sheer luck. He swung a punch, but this time, Pico counterattacked with a relentless barrage of strikes. The combination was so devastating that it left Jack in a coma. Meanwhile, Pico, the Armor Rectus, did his victory dance. The fight was over, or so it seemed, but Pico wasn't done. He approached Jack, ready to devour him, but as he got closer, Pico hesitated. Jack exuded an aura of danger, almost like a venomous creature. Indeed, Jack's body was toxic. Pico recalled a past incident where he had consumed something poisonous. It was worse than any physical pain he'd ever felt. Jack's presence reminded Pico of venomous wasps from ancient times. As an old man approached Jack and touched his body, Jack instinctively attacked even though he was unconscious. He attempted to gouge the man's ears with his fingers, showcasing an almost supernatural reflex. The episode shifted to Jack, battered and broken after his fight with Pico. He was bandaged up, having lost part of his face, and the doctors discussed his condition. Even the Anim's doctors were jacked, casually flexing while tending to Jack. They explained that the strange movements Jack displayed after being defeated were caused by muscle memory. They even told a story about a soldier who, after being decapitated, managed to grab his own head and run an unbelievable tale, but supposedly true. Suddenly, Jack woke up from his hospital bed, furious. He had taken a beating and wasn't ready to let it slide. The nurses rushed to warn that Jack was up and angry. Jack wasted no time. He went straight to confront Pico and immediately landed a kick to his face. A relentless series of punches followed. Despite his efforts, Jack's blows weren't enough to seriously harm Pico, who had fought dinosaurs in the past. Still, Pico started running. Something about Jack had him rattled. It wasn't about Jack's strength, it was something deeper. Jack was unlike anyone Pico had ever faced, a man who wouldn't stay down, even after being defeated. In the past, every dinosaur Pico fought had stayed down after a battle, but Jack was different. Jack's resilience wasn't natural. He had taken something to enhance his strength and endurance. Pico kept running, nearly reaching the coast, until he stopped in his tracks. His fear began to turn into rage. Grinding his teeth, Pico charged. Back at Jack, what followed was a brutal sequence of punches so intense that Jack spun like a top. Pico's blows turned him into a human Beyblade, leaving Jack twisting midair before crashing to the ground, utterly defeated. Jack had been beaten down not once, but twice in the same day. It was clear this fight wasn't just about strength. It was about endurance, resilience, and the ability to overcome fear. In the end, Jack lay broken, but his determination left a lasting impression. What a shame, huh? The guy is already toothless because Pico knocked out all his teeth. Now he's only got a few teeth left to fight with. But he woke up again and, being somewhat out of touch with reality, decided to challenge the big guy. Once more, however, on the way, he ran into Baki. Jack was convinced that Pico had spared him out of pity, which left him humiliated. Just take a look. Jack's mouth now looks like a cavern. Pico carried Jack to the top of a building and hung him from a metal bar, apparently saving him as a meal for later. Pico was literally storing food. Realizing this, Jack screamed. With all his might and, wounded in pride, gave up the fight, deciding to save it for another day. Meanwhile, that old gossip was already running to spread the news of what he had seen. Baki, on the other hand, was already in the arena, waiting for his moment to face Pico. The big question is, does Baki stand any chance against Pico? After all, Pico has already defeated the strongest warriors on Earth. Meanwhile, Baki seemed confident, with the old man even making nervous jokes. He remarked that Rama blood ran through Baki's veins, but that Jack, despite having the same blood, seemed much weaker. It was clear he needed a lot of help to become strong. When the old man asked if Baki was ready to fight, Baki responded in his own way, delivering a swift strike to a piece of straw and walking off provocatively. In the arena, Baki waited, and Pico finally stood up, but Pico had priorities: his hunger. He was feeding on raw meat, and this time the main course was a colossal chunk of Tyrannosaurus Rex, around 40 kilograms of meat. Imagine tasting a piece of giant reptile meat. Pico and Baki shared the feast right there, eating meat mixed with sand. Surely no nutritionist would recommend that. After eating, Pico seemed even stronger and more energetic. Baki realized that Pico only fought when he was in hunting mode. Because of this, he tried to provoke Pico in every possible way, knowing it would be a battle of endurance. When the fight finally began, Pico charged straight at him, advancing like a steamroller. But Baki, being strategic, managed to block the attacks and even countered with a double kick to Pico's chest. The climax of the battle was marked by a series of devastating blows, culminating in a leap by Baki that seemed to defy all laws of physics. He launched himself from an absurd height, and the fall seemed inevitably disastrous. When they both hit the ground, the impact was so massive that it left everyone in the arena silent. Surprisingly, Baki stood his ground, defying all expectations. The episode ends with Pico approaching Baki, preparing for the final blow, but something even bigger is coming in the next chapter. He managed to push his hand away, but in reality, he could barely move, let alone breathe. His lungs were in terrible shape, and blood was flying everywhere. On the outside, he was standing, but on the inside, he was completely wrecked. It was as if a massive stone was pressing down on him. Pico knew that Baki was in bad shape, but Baki managed to appear fine. Deep down, though, all he wanted was to rest and sleep. Suddenly, Baki kneeled down and was about to say a prayer, which showed just how desperate he was, but Baki slapped Pico's hand away and then punched him in the face. Pico could barely react. He was completely exhausted. He tried to speak, but could barely make a sound, mumbling about how he was done for. The crazy ape couldn't even understand what was happening anymore. Pico tried to deliver a super punch, but it ended up being a weak tap on Bak's face, almost like he was teasing him. It was as if Pico was inviting Bak to play around, and that made Bak furious. His brain went into overdrive, like a system malfunctioning. Bak then climbed to the top of the stairs. To prove his strength and determination, he jumped backward from that height, knowing he'd suffer twice the impact. He wanted to show he could defeat Pico, even after hurting himself further. That's when the giant woke up for real. Pico, on the other hand, started to recover, showcasing his incredible endurance. Bak landed a quick punch on Pico, followed by a heavier attack. He even attempted a flying kick, which didn't hit with full force but still knocked Pico to the ground. Up to this point, no fighter had ever managed to shake Pico mentally, but Bak was the first. Pico, who always seemed unbeatable, began to waver. Bak then used a technical move, a boxing technique, that completely disoriented Pico. This move caused Pico's whole body to vibrate, as if all the impact was concentrated on his skin. Pico was stunned, feeling an intense pain. He might have thought Bak was performing magic, given the precision and effectiveness of his strikes. Even so, Bak was also exhausted. As he approached Pico, he decided to attack strategically. He delivered a powerful slap to Pico's back, which caused enormous pain. This move, called the whip, targets the skin directly, causing a pain that anyone, from a child to a muscular adult, would feel the same way. Pico was completely shocked by the effectiveness of the strike, but it wasn't enough to defeat him. Pico assumed a deadly stance, preparing a violent attack. However, Bak began using martial arts stances inspired by animals. He took on the stance of the tiger, the eagle, the praying mantis, the monkey, and even the bear, but Pico wasn't fazed. Then Bak took a deep breath, stretched out his arms, and assumed the stance of the triceratops, leaving Pico utterly disoriented. Bak didn't stop there. He continued with other stances, such as the pterodactyl and the tyrannosaurus. Pico started to mentally break down, recalling past battles. Bak seemed to gather the strength of the most powerful dinosaurs into a single move when he charged at Pico. The force was so great that Pico felt like he was facing the bite of a tyrannosaurus. In the end, Bak proved he was truly remarkable. He twisted Pico's hand with such force that it felt like a blow from a prehistoric creature. Pico fell to the ground, defeated, and Bak once again showed that he is a true warrior. He hit the wall behind him to gain momentum. In the race, they created a technique to start with their bodies inclined, but Pico was the first to fully achieve a horizontal position. He charged at Bak, marking the moment down to milliseconds. Even the supernet itself realized Pico used the environment to propel himself and face the strongest monsters in the world, but Bak decided to counter the attack, standing completely still. He didn't even try to dodge. The one who went flying was Pico, launching straight into the stands like a ragdoll. This Bak really is a sorcerer. He just shook his hand like he was swatting a fly. The audience was terrified. It was only natural, given how intense the fight was. Then Bak pulled out all the stops and began urinating all over the battle arena, marking his territory like a dog would. This was no longer a fight that had crossed into madness. Pico returned to the fight, abandoning all his tricks. Now it was hand-to-hand combat. As Homo sapiens erectus, Pico landed a headbutt on Bak, driving him into the ground. He looked like an ostrich with his face buried. Pico then stomped on him repeatedly, trying to teach him a lesson. Afterward, he delivered an uppercut, and even though Bak blocked it, the blow still hurt. Once again, Bak climbed up to the arena lights, reminding everyone of Aliva. Imagine a fight between Aliva and Pico. It would be all-out chaos. No techniques, just raw strength. Even Hanayama would fight without cheap tricks. But how will Rama manage to stop this guy? Then came another kick to the chin, and Bak spun in the air. His ultimate goal, as always, is to surpass his father, but Pico kept punching. Bak dodged each attack with precision, moving just inches each time. If he were dancing like a bullfighter, Pico started to lose motivation. He'd never encountered someone this fast. At one point, it seemed like Bak became a ghost, slipping right through Pico. It was as if he had transcended the physical world. His skills reached such a level that no one in the arena could replicate. What he was doing, Bak had become unbeatable, and you start to wonder, why give a character so much power? Then, out of nowhere, Bak landed a blow that hit Pico where it really hurt. Pico was trembling, feeling pain worse than stubbing a toe on furniture. It was an agonizing scene. The hit was so violent it turned Pico into a spinning top. Like a Beyblade, for a while, they just stood there, talking about the pain. Then, when everyone thought the fight was over, Pico got back up. He was shaking with anger, smiling ominously. Now things were getting real. Pico had entered his final form, his hair moving magically, and all the scars on his body became visible. The crowd started applauding spontaneously. Old men were cheering like kids. Pico reorganized himself, fully entering battle mode. Bak accepted this as a sign of mutual respect. Despite fighting for over half an hour, Pico unleashed a punch so powerful it knocked Bak far away. Even though he blocked it, Bak retaliated with a powerful kick, and the fight escalated. Both fighters displayed unimaginable power. Bak saw claws, teeth, and horns in front of him as if facing a dinosaur. But this didn't stop him. The climax came when Pico landed a punch that seemed to freeze time. He thought carefully about how to follow up, but Bak countered with equal force, creating an intense sequence of violent blows. The arena couldn't contain them as they bounced from wall to wall. In the end, Bak had the upper hand, but he abandoned the chance to win, choosing brute strength over technique. Pico, sensing he might lose, used a last resort technique. The fight ended in a draw, with both fighters gaining mutual respect. Afterward, Bak escaped the hospital to meet Pico on a rooftop. They sat side by side, chatting and admiring the city skyline. It was a beautiful ending, wasn't it? Later, Rama had a meeting with Barack Obama. Rama, a show-off, was allowed to do whatever he wanted because even the US knew they couldn't defeat him. Obama placed a lump of coal on the table, and Rama squeezed it so hard it turned into a diamond, something only Superman could do. Meanwhile, they tried to put Pico back in stasis, but he escaped. Good luck finding him now. He left behind a severed head and disappeared into the night. A dinosaur in the middle of the city, that's his gift of gratitude. He stole from everyone and disappeared in Tokyo, or maybe that's how this anime ends, much to our sadness, because this anime is just too good. But don't worry, make sure to subscribe and leave a like because the continuation of Bak is coming soon right here on this channel. Let's hit 100 likes, let's go!